Hello and welcome to this week's video. This week we look at words and phrases used when we celebrate Pancake Day. We see how people make pancakes, the ingredients they use, and what makes the perfect pancake to share with family and friends. Don't forget to stay until the end to test your knowledge by taking our quiz. Anyway, let's get started with the first word. The first phrase this week is sweet spot. So let's take a look at how we would define sweet spot and how we would use this in an example in everyday life. But first, let's pronounce it. Sweet spot. And again, sweet spot. Fantastic. Now we've learnt a little how to pronounce this phrase, let's have a look at the definition. This is the perfect amount and combination of ingredients and cooking time in order to provide the best taste and texture. Brilliant! So, let's lastly take a look at the example of sweet spot. Mary hit the sweet spot when she made her pancakes, as they tasted delicious, and everyone else agreed. The second word in this week's lesson is leavener. So let's take a look at the definition and an example in how we may use leavener. But first, as always, let's take a look at the pronunciation. Leavener. And again, leavener. Great, that's really good. So now let's look more closely at the definition of leavener. This is an ingredient used to make food rise and become thicker when it is being cooked. That's really interesting. So now let's learn how we can put this into a sentence. John used a leavener to increase the thickness of his pancakes and make them more filling when eaten. The next word in this week's lesson is yeast. So let's find out a little more about yeast by looking at the definition and learning how we can use yeast in an everyday sentence. Well, first, let's take a look at how to pronounce yeast. Yeast. And again, yeast. Excellent. So now let's take a look at how we would define yeast. This is an ingredient consisting of living cells, which help to increase the size of food when cooked. Excellent. So now let's move on to take a look at an everyday example of when we use this in a sentence. Andy liked to use yeast as his ingredient to help his pancakes become thicker and more filling. For the penultimate word this week we have baking powder. So let's learn a little more about baking powder, the definition and the example. But firstly, let's take a look at how we would pronounce baking powder. Baking powder. And again, baking powder. Excellent. So now we've learnt the pronunciation, let's move on to the definition. This is an ingredient consisting of acids and liquids, which help to increase the size of food when cooked. Therefore, it is something else which can increase the size of the pancake, as we have seen a few times before. Great! So now let's take a look at an example of how we can use baking powder. Alice preferred to use baking powder to allow her pancakes to become thicker and more filling. Our final word this lesson is whisking. So let's take a look at how we pronounce this, as well as look at the definition and how we would use whisking as an example in everyday life while baking pancakes. Whisking. And again, whisking. Excellent. So now let's take a look in more detail how we would define this word whisking. This is to stir ingredients in a bowl, normally cream or eggs, in a very fast way. Excellent. So now let's look and see how we can use whisking in a sentence. Amy had to whisk the eggs together to help mix the yolks, which are yellow parts, and whites, which are the clear outer parts, in order to make the right ingredients for her pancake. Now it is time to test your knowledge with our weekly quiz to see how much of today's lesson you can remember. We will ask you 3 questions on the vocabulary we have learnt in this video. Question number 1. What do we say when we have found we have the perfect pancake? Would it be A, the sweet spot, B, the sugar spot, or C, the sour spot? And the correct answer is A, the sweet spot. Question number 2. What does a leavener do to a pancake? Does it A, increase the thickness, B, increases the sweetness, or C, does it make pancakes more crunchy? And the correct answer for question 2 is it increases the thickness? The third and final question is, what are we doing when we mix the ingredients together? Are we A, baking, B, weighing, or C, whisking? And the correct answer is C, whisking. Let us know in the comments how you did in this week's quiz, and congratulations if you got all 3 questions correct. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions about this video, or would like us to explain a word for you from any context, then please post your question in the comments box below. We are always happy to help. Don't forget to like our video in order to help us gain more viewers and to expand our channel so that we can provide you with an even better experience. Why not press the subscribe button and bell notification icon so you never miss one of our future videos. Next week, we will be looking at words and phrases related to students' unions. Anyway, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you again next week. Goodbye.